So yeah, today I'm going to talk about the much dreaded performance improvement plans, but with a bit of a spin, because I found that this process can actually help drive positive change, but it depends a lot in how it is set up. So when we think about PIPs, and especially the first time we have to deal with them, we usually think about how horrible and how challenging they are going to be. And it is true, nobody enjoys telling someone they have worked with and that they care about, hey, your performance is actually not good enough. And then there's also the question of, how is the person going to react? How is this going to change our relationship? Is the potential loss going to impact the team morale negatively? And if we put ourselves in the shoes of the person affected by it, then this can be like really, really scary, because most often PIPs are just seen as a preliminary step before letting somebody go, and even more in the current situation with layoffs and instability in the industry. So everyone understands that it is important to address performance concerns, but nobody's very excited about doing so. So then, in order to protect ourselves, we end up with processes that are run too rarely. In the worst case scenario, it can be once a year or even less, and also too late, to the point that the performance concern is so bad that the fate of the person is almost set in stone. And this is not good enough, because we are responsible for keeping our people accountable, but we can do so timely and in a more constructive way. So let's put our preconceived ideas about PIP aside and think about what we're really trying to achieve with this process. So in the best case scenario, what we want to see is an improvement in the relationship between the person and the company, the team, etc. And this is actually the win-win situation, because we get to keep a person that showed that they're valuable in the past, and they get to keep a stable job, which is also a good thing. And then with this in mind, it makes total sense to set this up for them to succeed and to support them throughout the whole process. But even with the most constructive and positive attitude, we're also going to have to accept that it's not always going to work out. Some people are going to react positively, considering the situation at least, but for others it's just going to be the ultimate reason to disengage. And I found that it's actually quite difficult to predict in which group a person is going to end. So during the rest of this talk, I'm going to cover the whole process, from the very initial hints on, hey, there is a concern, to the initiation, the whole implementation of the PIP, the wrap-up, and a bit of next steps. So at the very beginning, what you're actually trying is to avoid getting into a PIP. Here, the idea is that... Oh, it's...
Your earring is clicking.
Sorry. Okay, so here the idea is to make them understand that there is a concern as early as possible, probably during one-on-ones. And I understand that we usually try to assume best intention and we let things maybe slip a couple times, but this can be actually quite counterproductive, because then the person is set in this way of operating, and when you tell them that there is an issue, then the reaction is going to be, well, so why didn't you just tell me earlier? But anyway, sometimes just a call to attention may be enough and the situation is resolved. But otherwise, then you can start discussing a development plan with the person. And at this point, you're working together to try to improve. And since setting this plan is going to take a while, you may as well try to dig into and find out what is the underlying reason, instead of going straight for addressing the performance problem. There may be a personal situation in the background, and adapting the development plan to that may show that you are willing to be flexible, and it's an early way to show that, yes, you actually want to support them. At this point, you can also make it somewhat informal, but also communicate clear expectations. And follow up frequently, find out what's working, what is not, ensure to adapt, so again, the person can succeed. And it may be that they just needed a bit of attention for a period of time, and then it may work out, in which case, congratulations, you again avoided going into a PIP. Unfortunately, if the situation continues, then you'll have to set up a formal process. And in that case, I think these are the absolute musts when communicating what is going to happen. First, reiterate that the objective is to make the relationship work, but also don't downplay how serious the situation is. Describe what are the good outcomes, but also make very clear that there is a potential for termination. Ensure that you use measurable evaluation criteria. Don't leave anything open for interpretation, because at this point the situation is already uncomfortable and awkward enough, and the person may appreciate any concretion that you bring. And finally, explain if and when do you expect to see a positive evolution, even if it's not like fulfilling 100% of the criteria, and also if there is some sort of point of no return. And then before calling it a day, ensure that the person has a chance to talk, get their feedback, let them ask questions, ensure that everything is fully understood. And also identify what kind of support they're going to need from you, but also from others, because that is really going to help guiding your efforts later on. And yeah, definitely just don't run through the initial meeting at warp speed, because then you may later find out that the person didn't buy into it from the very beginning. So now we're getting into it, and here you will continue following up during one-on-ones, but now you have this measurable criteria to keep your feedback always as objective as possible. It is important that if you see improvement, be positive and encouraging and celebrate with the person, celebrate their success. And if you have any concerns, then raise them early. Don't let them think that things are going well when they're not, because then they may end up getting to that point of no return. I actually don't have a feedback bubble for this one, but trying to be too nice was one of the mistakes I made in one of my first PIPs. And then finally, keep as much of a written record as possible, because you may need it later on, especially if the outcome is negative. During this period, engaging your team is going to make both your lives so much easier. And it's also going to make the team empathize a bit more with the person going through the PIP. Of course, you have to keep the process absolutely confidential, but you can still try to gather support with more neutral questions like the one that is here on this slide. And you can also talk to your product manager, so they add items to the backlog that are aligned with the objectives of the PIP. Because if the product and the team and then the person are going in completely opposite directions, it's going to be very, very hard for them to have the space to improve. So time passes, and we're at the end of the process, and unfortunately, one of the possible outcomes is that things didn't work out. In which case, well, you have to go through the criteria that weren't satisfied, as usually, keep it as objective as possible, don't make it personal and create any sort of controversy. Decide also who is going to deliver the message about termination, whether it would be HR or you. I personally find the legal language a bit tricky, so I prefer that they do it, but if that is not an option for you, then at least you can ask for some guidance. And on the other hand, everything may have been good, in which case, again, celebrate and show how happy you are that it all worked out. And there may be some follow-up actions at this point. Maybe there is a salary update that you need to discuss with the person. And finally, don't just leave this process in the past. Keep catching up with the person for a little while to see if things are still working out or maybe things are regressing. So, well, this is the end of the talk. I hope these guidelines were useful and that the next time that you have to conduct a PIP, it is not as scary. And if the culture in your organization is that of just using it as a preliminary step before termination, then maybe you can try to find a sponsor that will be willing to support trying out this model. I can tell you that at least my supervisors have always been quite positive, and well, eventually they send me to Lead Dev to talk about it, so you never know. So thank you everyone for listening, and have a great rest of the day.